This is what we're making, a set of 3 interlocking rings, commonly called a Russian wedding ring. We're going to make what I call a Russian wedding ring, which is 3 interlocking rings. You need to get your ring size in millimeters. Always zero your calipers. And mine is an O, and it's 17.76. Write this down because you'll need it again. Now we need to know the height of our wire, and this is 1.2. So you add that to your ring size and multiply by 3.14. Now, when you've done all of that, add 3 millimeters. And the reason we're adding 3 millimeters at the end is we're compensating where the rings overlap. My measurement is 62.5 for the length. Now, one way you can do that is center your calipers, put your measurement in the window. Mine is and straighten your wire. This is half round, and you can hook your calipers on the end and then just, I'll show you. Hook the calipers on the end and drag the point across your ring shank. And it leaves you a nice clear mark. Saw this because we want a nice flat end. Make 3 of these. Now, when you have your 3 ring shanks, line them up with each other. They should be exactly the same length. If they aren't, file the longer ones to match the shorter ones. Make sure both ends are nice and square. If they're not pliable, anneal them, which means just heating it up until it's a dull red. Let the red disappear. Quench in water, pickle. Take these out of the pickle, rinse them, dry them, and just so we don't forget, hallmark them now. And this ensures that you'll clean up the bump from the hallmark stamp while you're doing the rest of your sanding. Now we're using flat half-round pliers for this. Yeah. And I just call these ring bending pliers, but they're flat half-round. Half-round goes on the inside, and you're just going to make these into a rough oval because what we want is for the ends to match perfectly. And if the metal is level like this, then you stand a better chance of the join being perfect. So do all 3, and we're making them completely separately. We'll make and finish all 3 rings completely up through polishing, and then we'll anneal 2, cut them, and assemble and re-solder. Now the reason we're doing that is you can't make these rings and link them and then get them round. if they're all soldered together. So we want to solder them, make them perfectly round, finish the rings. Once your rings are soldered, pickle them, dry them, and then round them up on the ring mandrel. Now we dry them so we don't rust the ring mandrel, and we're going to round them up with a rawhide hammer. And one of the reasons that we wrote the size down is we know that 3 millimeters is 3 sizes, so we can check that our rings are the right size now. So mine is an O, so it should be PQR when I've hammered it up. So I just hold my finger against the ring and pull down slightly as I round. Do all 3. Now the rings are round this way, but they may be a bit wavy sideways, in which case you just take a nice polished bench anvil, put it on the ring one at a time and give it a good smack, and it'll straighten it out. Now take each ring, use 400 grade paper on your sanding stick, follow the curve of the ring, sand the solder back, because we don't want any residual solder anywhere except the tiny little line where the joint is. So this should be, the joint should be completely invisible, inside, outside. Do the sides of the ring at this time, make sure that they're nice, and the bump where your hole mark is. Then when you get all of that, polish it on Tripoli. Hold it on a wooden ring mandrel and polish it on the Tripoli wheel. When all of the outsides are done, take a piece of paper off your sanding stick, put it on your split mandrel, put it on a split mandrel on your handpiece, and clean up the solder joint on the inside. If your joint was good and you used the right amount of solder, you won't have much to clean up, and that applies to everything. Part of the trick to becoming a good jeweler is figuring out the correct amount of solder. We now have our 3 perfectly finished rings. Pick the nicest one, anneal the other 2. Now the reason we anneal the other 2 is we're going to cut them on the solder joint. It will show us where the joint is, and they won't spring apart when we saw it. Now annealing is not soldering. Annealing is a lower temperature than soldering. Don't bring this up to the point where the solder runs. Dull red, quench it, saw on the joint. Hold the ring sideways on your bench peg. Locate your solder joint. And saw through. Now, the spring, the tension should be relaxed because you annealed it, and it will have a perfect join when you put it back together. So open it sideways like a jump ring, thread it through the one that is still solid. When you bring it back, push the ends slightly towards each other, and you should have a perfect join that's ready to solder. Do the next one. If you did a really good solder job, it should be difficult to locate. Oftentimes it's easier to see on the inside. Sideways, and thread both of these onto it. Push it slightly together. Make sure that the join touches 100%. Back onto your third hand, joint up. One tiny piece of solder, because this is such a good join, it should take a minimum amount of solder. Small amount of flux, top and on the inside. And what I do is I pick solder, means I heat up my pick, I pick up the solder, bring the ring up to temperature, the flux will go clear, you place the solder on the join, the solder will flow, just like that. Do the next one. We have our rings fresh out of the pickle, and if you did a good job, the joins will be pretty schmick at this point. Take your sanding stick now with 400 grade paper, tidy up the solder join on those two rings that you've just soldered, and then we'll put the 3 rings on a wooden sanding stick and polish them together on the Tripoli wheel, and where they overlap, they will slide back and forth so that you'll be able to polish, get a really high polish on them. Now, if you were tempted to put a different texture on each one of these before you assemble them, what you have to remember is if you're putting a hammered texture on, the ring's going to get bigger. So just take that into consideration, because what you really want is all 3 rings to be the same size. So here are my 3 rings interlocking, all polished. And they should fit. My size 0. Finished.